Okay, so we're looking at the planet Mars here in Google Earth, and I wanted to just give you a quick preface to this clip so that folks understand where I'm coming from. First off, this is information about the Mars Global Surveyor, which supposedly went to Mars. And as you can see here, it was in a low, nearly polar orbit, which is very close to the planet. The equivalent of 2 Earth years, and it completed its primary mission. But it says here the mission studied the entire Martian surface. Now this is just one of many. And look what we have here. We have a sloppy patchwork of mostly low resolution images, some of which are intentionally degraded. And I'll demonstrate this by going to the famous Sedona region here. And there's the face that everybody knows from Mars, and you can do a historical lookup on this. And you know, it's hard to tell whether they haven't been to Mars and they're using things like this to create controversy so that people don't look, or whether they're just simply hiding what they found. And when you see stuff like this, I mean, come on, really? Look at this. This is intentional. And even next to this big blurry mess that they put up as part of their map, look at these images. Anyone who knows anything about digital imagery can tell you that this is intentionally degraded imagery. So what I'm going to do here is demonstrate that as early as the 1800s we were getting quite a bit of information on Mars, and then there was a concerted effort to cover up that information. And I'm going to look specifically at the idea that there were canals. There are two arguments used to discredit this. The first is that there was a mistranslation of the word canale. The second is that it was an optical illusion. Somehow across the planet everyone saw the same optical illusions. Anyhow, here we go. Okay, welcome to the Crow Show. If you would like to support the Crow Discovery Project, links are in the description of this video. I wanted to put up my primary rule that I live by. Never believe in something just because you've been told it's true. We live in times where there's good reason to question nearly everything. Okay, so this is an image, or actually a video of Mars that I shot right as it was coming into opposition, which basically means it's going to be the best view as it's closest to Earth at this time. As you can see, it's out of focus, the viewing is not great, and this is for a few reasons. I'm near city lights, the seeing probably wasn't great on this night, but they've been chemtrailing all week, and in my opinion, that's one of the major reasons that we have such a hard time getting good shots of objects in space, is because we're looking through so much junk that has been sprayed by the chem planes. Now this next video that I'm going to load up here is Mars at opposition, on the night of opposition, and as you can see it's a much better, clearer picture, but still not the greatest. Now what we're going to talk about here is the canals and the idea that what people saw in the early 1800s was wrong. During the planet Mars opposition in 1877, a guy named Giovanni observed a dense network of linear structures on the surface of Mars, which he called canali, in Italian meaning channels, but the term was mistranslated into English as canals. Now this is one of the big arguments that we hear, and it's a false argument. First of all, regardless of what he called it, he thought he was looking at man-made canals. That's what he was talking about, that's what he was reporting. Yet the argument has been put forward that there was a mistranslation of the word canali. So this next slide, while the term canals indicates an artificial construction, the term channel connotes that he observed features that were natural. So here's the argument in a nutshell. They're trying to say that he was meaning to portray natural features when in fact it was his words were mistranslated into man-made canals, and it's simply not true. He intentionally meant to convey that these things were man-made. Now here's the etymology of both words, and as you can see they have a common Latin root, canalis, and the definitions here are almost verbatim identical to each other. So there's the first method that they have used to discredit this, kind of shot down. The second is that everyone was seeing optical illusions. They tried to prove this by putting schoolboys into a room with a map at a distance and having them draw what they saw. This is how they proved that what people were seeing when they observed Mars was an optical illusion. And in the following images and maps I'm going to show you, I'm going to prove darn well that there was no optical illusions going on here, and certainly not across the planet. Okay, so let's start looking at some very old observational images of Mars. Here we have Cassini in 1666 and Herschel in 1780, and I've put up my shot in the modern age, and you can see these guys may have not had optics quite as good as ours, but they definitely had better seeing, and you can tell by what they're sketching. It's not far off what I'm seeing. Now in the late 1800s you start to get all the reports of canals, and this is what people are sketching. This image harkens back to the one I just showed you that I took. You can see how people would get an image like this based on the images that I showed you. Now, in Wiki Commons, where I get my royalty-free images, there was this, and it's kind of crazy. It's from the Air Force in 1962, and the only thing it says is that they removed the latitude and longitude lines. But look, canals everywhere from the Air Force in 62. Now this guy, Antonianati, or whatever his name is, he's a big supporter of the idea of canals, and then we are told he gets a chance to go use a 32 or a 33-inch scope, and then he says, oh, it was optical illusions. Crazy thing about that is, the larger the lens in those days, or the mirror, the more likely you're going to get aberration, because it's a bigger lens and harder to create. And he ends up forming the royal kingly something or other, which to me casts suspicion on him for telling the truth. At any rate, here's the U.S. Air Force image and Antonianati's image, and you can see how similar they are. They're just so similar, and they don't look like anything we are filming in the modern day when we look at Mars. Now here's one from a guy called Neaston in 1905, and you can see the effort that's been put into this. But I'm going to focus all the way to the right here. You can see where it says Amazonas. Now pay attention to those long canal lines that have been drawn. I'm going to come back to those when I focus in on Giovanni and Percival Lowell, the main two characters that I'm going to focus on in this. So look at that Amazonas region and the long canals. Okay, so here's the two gentlemen who did all this work that I believe has been marginalized and covered up. Giovanni, Schiaparelli, and Percival Lowell. And I actually went to the Lowell Observatory and looked through this scope. It's a beautiful scope, old, antique. We looked at the moon, we looked inside a crater, beautiful optics, but anyhow, moving on. Okay, so here's Giovanni's images. And there's a few things you should note. First of all, remember how Giovanni's images look here, and then remember what Lowell's look like. Lowell's images look like junk. They're low resolution, they're hard to find very many of them. And just to comment on the Canali argument used to discredit this whole thing, Percival Lowell actually supported Giovanni Schiaparelli's ideas, and his intention was that these were man-made canals. So the introduction of an argument that it was mistranslated because they were natural features is just a cop-out, particularly when you see on the back end of that illusions, optical illusions being introduced into the argument. So anyhow, Lowell observed Mars for 15 years, and if you do a search now for his images of Mars, there's a handful of them, and they're junk. They're really low resolution. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? I mean, look at this. You can see the effort that went into making an image like this to get the latitude and longitude. You got to realize when he's viewing the planet, it's spinning night after night. So to keep track of all this is really quite an effort. And on each of these maps, you can't even read what he has written. Now here's, these are modern additives. The numbers on these are modern additives. But the point I'm making is, of 15 years of research, a concerted effort to discredit the work that these two guys in particular did, showing all these features on Mars, and actually, like I said, the 27-inch scope at Lowell, it's a great scope. There's nothing wrong with that equipment, and so it's a bit mind-boggling. You know they are covering something up. And then we get into this. Here is a 1962 Air Force map based on Lowell's work, apparently put together because the Mariner missions were about to go to Mars, but long after people had dismissed the idea of canals. Here's the Air Force making, lo and behold, a map for their Mariner mission from NASA that shows all the canals. It doesn't make sense. It makes no sense at all. If the canals don't exist, why would the Air Force ever make a map like this? Okay, to put a fine point on everything we've seen here, here's Google Earth with Google Mars loaded, and anyone can do this. Recently, there have been some additional layover maps. Now, we've talked about a few of these guys, so let's look at Giovanni here. Now, for some reason, Giovanni's stuff is loaded upside down here, but you can see the Amazonas area here and these long lines. Now let's load Percival Lowell. Here we have them again, these long lines through the Amazonas region. Now here's the real kicker. The United States Air Force has a 1962 map that they recently published for Google Mars, and here it is, and here we have the very same long lines, these canals or channels or whatever the heck you want to call them. The United States Air Force, which I demonstrated in some earlier stills that I showed you, recently made this available, made in 1962, to Google Mars. So here we have it. You know, they're still showing glimpses of what the old observers from 100 years ago or more were reporting they saw on Mars. So go figure. Are we getting the truth? I don't think so. Okay, so in closing I want to mention that I have learned that using the sketches that astronomers have done are always more accurate than the maps that we get of the moon, as an example. When I look through my telescope at the moon, I find that sketches that other astronomers have done sitting at their eyepiece are much more accurate than the moon maps we get. And as a matter of fact, if you go out and look at moon maps, when you get down to the fine details, you'll find that hardly any of them match. You know, Lowell was a noted observer. He was known for his acumen as a top-rate observer. And he mentioned the color changes of the planet Mars, and he attributed this to plant life over the seasons. I have seen personally the color change when the magic comet Ison went by. We noted that the planet got very pale very quickly. This is supposed to happen over 18 months. We saw it happen in less than 30 days. And I made a clip about this at the time, and I was contacted by a couple of observatories and an astrophotography head for the country of New Zealand. And I told him that I would retract everything I had said about the planet Mars if he simply showed me current footage of the planet Mars next to the star. I think the star was Regulus, so that I knew that it was a current image. And what I got back from him was a completely overexposed, useless image of Mars. And that really got me thinking. At any rate, there was a gentleman who contacted me with regard to my lunar wave footage, and he was very covert about everything. He explained that he'd been in a position where he knew certain things, and one of the things that he mentioned after talking about my lunar wave and telling me that I was spot on and that I was on the right track and to be careful, he said that the leaked Mars images that show very high-res plants, herds of animals, and all this other stuff, he said those were real. Now, I've seen the images, and I don't know what their source is, and I don't know if they're real, but it was kind of coincidental that this gentleman mentioned that to me about 3 or 4 months after I had first seen those images. In closing, I will say, I think that there's a concerted effort to cover up what Lowell and Giovanni observed. I think their observations were accurate, and I think there may be well something in place that obscures our view of the red planet in the same way that our view of the moon is obscured, which I've shown in other videos. So there it is, and I urge you all to go out and observe. And in closing, Apparently my videos are not going out on live feed, and if you're subbed to me, you should always check, because I'm getting reports that people are unsubbed 4, 5, 6 times. So cheers.